So hi guys, in this chapter we will be looking at Indian economy from 1950 to 1990. So what we will be studying from this chapter will be come to know the goals of India's 5-year plans, know about the development policies in different sectors such as agriculture and industry from 1950 to 1990, then learn to think about the merits and limitations of the regulated economy. Okay, so and on August 1947, India walked a new dawn of freedom. Okay, and finally, we were masters of our own destiny. The leaders of the independent India had to decide among them what type of economic system most suitable for our nation. Okay, how our economy wanted to be or needed to be functioning. And socialism appealed more to the Jawaharlal Nehru, and however, he was not in favor of what was in Soviet Union. Okay, and all the factories and farms in the country were owned by the government, and there was no private property, and there was no development for the private sector. Okay, and Nehru in many leaders and thinkers of the newly independent India sought an alternative to the extreme versions of capitalism also and socialism also. Okay, basically sympathizing with the socialist outlook, they founded an answer in an economic system which, in their view, combined with the best features of socialism without its drawback. In this view, India would be a socialist society with a strong public sector but also with private property and democracy. Okay, and before we go into depth about economics and all, we need to find different types, or we need to learn about different types of economic systems. What is socialism, what is capitalism, and what is communism? Okay, all these things need to be dealt with. Okay, so here are some questions, three questions. What goods and services would be provided or would be produced in the country? Okay, then how should the goods and services be produced? Should producers use more human labor or more capital or machines for producing things? How should the goods and services be distributed among people? These are some questions. Okay, one answer to these questions depends on the market forces, that is, of supply and demand in a market economy, also called capitalism. Okay, first we will be discussing about capitalism. Okay, only those consumer goods will be produced that are in demand, that are profit motive, goods that can be sold profitably either in the domestic or in the foreign markets. That is, if cars are in demand, cars will be produced, and if bicycles are in demand, bicycles will be produced. And also, if labor is cheaper than capital, more labor intensive methods of production will be used, and vice versa. In a capitalist society, the goods produced are distributed among people not on the basis of what people need, but on the basis of the purchasing power. If a person or a certain person can buy these things, it will be produced. If they cannot buy it, it won't be produced. Okay, in such that if poor people need money or need house, we can say need house, but the poor people can't pay for it, so house for the poor won't be produced. So such a society did not appeal to the Jawaharlal Nehru, our first prime minister. So it meant great majority of people in the country would be left behind without the chance to improve their quality of life. Okay, and when we look at socialism, okay, socialism society answers three questions in totally a different manner. Okay, the initial three questions in a different manner. In a socialist society, the government decides what goods are to be produced in accordance with the needs of the society. Okay, here we are looking at the needs. It is assumed that the government knows what is good for the people of the country, and so the desires of the individual consumers are not seen and given much importance. The government individualism is not respected here. Okay, government decides. Government is ultimate decision maker. Okay, how they should be distributed, how it should be produced. In principle, distribution under socialism is supposed to be based on what people need and not what they can afford. Purchasing power has no value over here. Okay, unlike under capitalism, for example, a socialist nation provides free health care for all its citizens. Strictly a socialist society have no private property, since everything is owned by the state. In Cuba, in China, for example, most of the economic activity are governed by the socialistic principles. Okay, in China and all, we cannot have property. Individual property is not there. State has proper control over it. Okay, most economies in are mixed economies. Okay, we will see what is a mixed economy. The government and the market together answer the three questions of what to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute what is produced in a mixed economy. The market will provide whatever goods and services it can produce well, and the government will provide the essential goods and services which the market fails to do. Okay, if the poor people can't buy houses, housing will be provided by who? By the government. Okay, and if there is demand for certain products, it will be met by the market. Okay, in such a system is mixed economy. Okay, now we will, in order to look into planning commission or okay, all these things, we need to know what is a plan. Okay, plan spells out how the resources of a nation are put in use. It should have some general goals as well as specific objectives which are to be achieved within a certain period of time. Okay, in India, plans were of 5-year duration, 5-year plans. Okay, were called 5-year plans. Our plan documents were up to the year 2017 not only specify the objectives to be obtained in the 5-year plans of the plan, but also which have to be achieved over a period of 20 years. Long-term goal was also there. Okay, it was called perspective plan. 5-year plans were supposed to provide basis for the perspective plan. For 20 years, how the development should be there, it was already given, and in that 20 years, 5 years were properly described. Okay, and in this unrealistic, it will be unrealistic to expect all the goals on the plan to be given equal importance in all the plans. In fact, the goals of introducing modern technology may be in conflict with the goal of increasing. See, when the modern technology is increased, suppose say robots are coming in picture for the labor force, so a lot of people will be losing their jobs. Okay, there will be a conflict. Unemployment will increase, but the robots will provide cheap labor. They will be better efficient than the normal people, but there is a conflict of interest. Okay, India's 5-year plans did not spell out how much of each and every goods and services is to be produced. It is neither possible nor necessary. Uh, it is enough if the plan is specific about the sectors where it plays a commanding role. For instance, power generation and irrigation, while leaving the rest to the market. Okay. So economy in the private sector remains a part of the plan effort. Okay. Industrial policy resolution of the 1948 and the directive principles of the Indian Constitution reflected this outlook. Okay, of the Planning Commission. Okay, and in 1950, the Planning Commission was set up by the Prime Minister and as its chairperson. Okay, and the era of 5-year plans had begun. And goals of 5-year plans. Okay, a plan should have some clearly defined goals. Okay, and the goals of the 5-year plans were growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. And initially, we focused on modernization and self-reliance. Okay, and so we'll be looking at growth. It refers to the increase in the country's capacity to produce output of goods and services within the country. Okay, it implies either a large stock of productive capital, a large size of supporting services like transport and banking, or an increase in the efficiency of the productive capital. Okay, proper use of capital, a good indicator of economic growth in the language. Just read through Mahinobi's, he's an architect of the Indian planning, father of Indian planning, we can say, and his recommendations were started from the second planning commission. So he established the Indian Statistical Institute, and Sankhya is a journal by him. Both these are highly reputed among the statisticians and economists all around the world even today. Okay, just go through him. It is kind of important. Okay, in the personality factors is a very important person. Okay, and okay, how can we calculate the growth? Growth is like is steady increase in the gross domestic product. The GDP is the market value of all the goods and services produced in the country during a year. Okay, you can think of GDP as a cake, and growth is an increase in the size of the cake. If the cake is larger, more people can enjoy it. It is necessary to produce more goods and services if the people of India are to enjoy a more rich and varied life. Okay, GDP of a country is derived from factors in the economy, namely where? In the agricultural sector, industrial sector, and the service sector. So talking of service sector, as a country develops, it undergoes structural changes. In the case of India, the structural change is peculiar. Okay, usually with development, the share of agriculture declines. Okay, it is an indicator. The share of industry becomes dominant. At higher levels of development, service sector contributes more to the GDP than the other two sectors. In India, we can see the share of agriculture in GDP was more than 50%. Okay, as we would expect in a poor country. But by 1990, the share of service sector was 40.59%, more than the agricultural or industry sectors. Okay, like what we find in a developed nation. This phenomenon of growing share of service sector was an acceleration in the post 1991 period. Okay, we will discuss it about in the later chapters. Okay, and modernization. We have discussed about growth. Now we will look at modernization to increase the production of goods and services. We needed what? Producers had to adopt new technology. For example, a farmer can increase the output of a farm by using new seed variants or high yielding seeds, okay, instead of using the old ones. Similarly, a factory can increase output by using a new type of machine. Adoption of new technology is called modernization. Okay, our modernization does not refer to only the use of new technology but also changes the social outlook, such as the recognition of that women should have the same rights as men. In a traditional society, women are supposed to remain, or patriarchal society, women are supposed to remain at home while men work. A modern society makes use of the talents of women in workplace, in banks, factories, schools, etc. Such a society, in most occasion, is also prosperous. Okay, and self-reliance. A nation can promote economic growth and modernization by using its own resources. This is an important term, its own resources. Okay, or by resources imported from other nations. First 5-year plans gave importance to self-reliance. Okay, which means avoiding the imports of those goods which could be produced in our country. Okay, this policy was considered necessary in order to reduce our dependence on foreign countries, especially for food. Okay, further, it was feared that the dependence on imported good supplies, foreign technology, and foreign capital may make India's sovereignty vulnerable to foreign interference. Because once we start depending, suppose, say, for food from America, the American government can dictate terms. Such a thing should not happen. So, self reliance was necessary. Then we have equity. Now, growth, modernization, and self reliance by themselves may be improved, may not improve the kind of life which people are living. A country can have high growth, the most modern technology developed in the country itself, and also have most of its people living in poverty. See, suppose we can find even with growth, even with modernization, even with self reliance, we can see a lot of people poor. It is not actually, these people are not developing, they are not going along with us. So what needs to be, then balance need to be attained. So let us now and this equity is maintained by what, the governmental factors. Okay, and we will see now what, how the first 5-year plans covering the period of 1950 to 1990 attempted to attain these four goals, and the extent to which they succeed in doing so with reference to agriculture, industry, and trade. You will study the policies and developmental issues in after 1990, one in chapter 3 also in the next video. Okay, first we'll be looking at agriculture. Okay, we in chapter 1 we discussed about just how our economy was just after the independence. Okay, and the policymakers of independent India had to address these issues, which they did through land reforms, promoting the use of high yielding variety seeds, and assured a revolution of Indian growth. Land reforms. Okay, we are looking at land reforms in the agricultural sector. At the time of independence, the land tenure system was characterized by intermediaries. Okay, called zamindari systems. Okay, they who merely collected rent from the actual tillers of the soil without contributing towards improvements of the farm. Okay, the low productivity, especially in the case of Bengal region, all these where the hold of zamindars were high. Okay, the low productivity of the agriculture sector forced India to import food from where, United States of America. Equity in agriculture, called land reforms, which primarily referred to change in the ownership of the land holdings. Just a year after independence, steps were taken to abolish intermediaries. Steps were taken to abolish the zamindari system, okay, to make the tillers the owners of land. The idea behind this move was that the ownership of the land would give incentives to the tillers, the farmers. The lowest of the lowest would be benefit from this. Okay, land ceiling was another policy to promote equity in the agriculture sector. This means fixing the maximum size of land that could be owned by an individual in the country. Purpose of land ceiling was to reduce the concentration of land ownership in few hands. The abolition of the intermediaries meant that some 200 lakh tenants came in direct contact with the government. They were thus freed from being exploited by the zamindars. It is kind of like a war on zamindar system. Okay, the ownership conferred on tenants gave them the incentive to increase output, and this contributed to the growth of agriculture. Okay, but in some areas it was not effective. For example, in the North Indian states, where the system of zamindaris were strong, this did not happen, and there were also other loopholes in the system. Suppose say even before the land reforms came into being, the people came to know about it, and what happened? They began to register the land in the name of various relatives in order to escape all these things. And also they registered the name on their behalf and removed and told the government that they are the tillers, they are the sole owners of the land, and they are the people who are tilling the soil. But in the case of we can say Kerala and West Bengal, it was land reforms were successful because it was actually a communist government at that time. These states had governments committed to the policy of land to the tiller, because in communism they wanted the peasant to grow. Okay, that was the core concept of kind of like the core concept of communism. Now we have, after land reforms and land sealing reforms, we have green revolution. Okay, at independence, about 75% of the country's population was dependent on agriculture. Productivity in the agriculture sector was very low because of the use of old technology. Okay, there was no advancement or modernization in the agriculture sector. Okay, so and irrigation facilities were scarce. Okay, the stagnation in the agriculture during the colonial rule was permanently broken by the Green Revolution. Okay, this refers to the large increase in production of food grains resulting from the use of high yielding variety of seeds. Okay, especially for wheat and rice. The use of these seeds required the use of fertilizers, pesticides in the correct quantities, as well as regular supply of water. Okay, farmers who could benefit from high yielding seeds require reliable irrigation facilities, and also well as some amount of financial stability was also needed. So there is a question that arises: what about the poor people? Vast amount of farmers in our society are poor people. So how could the Green Revolution benefit the common people? So the government did was that what the government did was that those normal farmers who had less than 2 acres of land, in order to support them, government gave out subsidies for the purchase of seeds, for the purchase of fertilizers, so they could also be benefited. Okay, so the portion of agriculture produce after their need, okay, in the market by the farmers are called market surplus. Okay, and a good portion of wheat and rice were sold by the farmers in the market. As a result, price of food grains declined related to, because with the high rate of products in the market, the price decreases, deflation happens. Okay, and the Green Revolution enabled the government to procure sufficient amount of food grains to build a stock which would be used at the time of food shortage. Okay, while the nation had immensely benefited from the Green Revolution, the technology involved was not free from risk. One risk was the possibilities of the increase of disparities between small. This we have discussed. So going in a debate over subsidies also is there. Just go through it. The economic justification of subsidies in agriculture is at present a hotly debated question. It is generally agreed that it is necessary to use subsidies to provide incentive use of adoption. So most of the people in our country find it hard to adopt this because they have poor financial stability. Okay, subsidy needs to be provided to these farmers. Most farmers are very poor. They will not be able to afford the required inputs without subsidies. So that's a fact. So government provided them with subsidies. Okay, thus by late 1960s, Indian agriculture productivity had increased sufficiently to enable the country to be self-sufficient in food grains. This is an achievement to be proud of. On the negative side, about 65% of the country's population continued to be employed in agriculture even as late as 1990. See, 65% of the population still was in the agricultural sector. Okay, and that proportion reflected in the GDP also. Okay, and in India between 1950 and 1990, the proportion of GDP contributed by the agriculture declined. Okay, there is a declination significantly, but not the population depending on it. Okay, population increased on that, but the amount of revenue generated from the agriculture sector declined. Why was such a large proportion of population engaged in agriculture, although agriculture output could have grown, okay, with less people working in, because the industrial sector that we developed, that could not accommodate these farmers. Okay, many economists call this as an important failure in our policies followed during 1950 and 1990. Okay, industry and trade. Economists have found that Poor nations can progress only if they have a good industrial sector. Okay, industry provides employment which is more stable than the employment in agriculture. Agriculture, we can say there are climatic factors, other pests, and invasion from foreign species. All these things are there in agriculture sector. But in the case of industry, the employment is kind of stable. So industry need to be developed. Okay, lastly, it was initially confined to the textiles. In the previous video, we have discussed it. Two well-managed iron steel firms, one at Jamshedpur and the other in Calcutta. Obviously, we needed to expand the industrial base with a variety of industries if the economy was to grow. Because even though with all these things, the contribution towards GDP was very low. Okay, public and private sectors in Indian industrial development. The big question facing the policymakers was what should be the role of the government and the private sector in the industrial development. At the time of independence, Indian industrialists did not have the capital to undertake what investment in the industrial ventures required for the development of Indian economy. Okay, it is principally for these reasons that the market was, what were the reasons? The market was not big enough to encourage industrials to undertake major projects, even if they had the capital to do so. Okay, government had to play an extensive role in promoting the industrial sector. Okay, how did they do it? Okay, in addition, the decision to develop the Indian economy on socialist lines led to the policy of government controlling, commanding the heights of the economy. In the second five-year plan, this meant that the government would have complete control over those industries that were vital for economy. Okay, the policies of the private sector would have to be complementary to those of the public sector. From 1950 to 1990, and in the current scenario, we are seeing a reversal of events. Okay, we are seeing privatization, and we will discuss this topic in the coming chapters. In accordance with Industrial Policy Resolution 1956. Okay, in accordance with the goal of the states controlling the commanding heights of the economy, Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 was adopted. This resolution formed the basis of the second five-year plan. Okay, the plan which tried to build the basis of the socialistic pattern. We initially adopted a socialistic pattern with a private sector. Okay, this resolution classified industries into three categories. First category comprised of industries which could be exclusively owned by the government. Second, it was in which the private sector could supplement the efforts of the public sector. We can say a corporate, and taking the sole responsibility, and the government taking the sole responsibility for starting new units. The third category consists of the remaining industries that were in the private sector. Okay. Although there was a category of industries left to the private sector, the sector was kept under state control through a system of licenses. Now we discuss about the license Raj, and all these things are coming in the coming sessions. Okay. No new industry was allowed unless a license was obtained from the government. This policy was used for promoting industry in backward regions. Okay, but it backfired very badly. It was easier to obtain a license if the industry unit was established in an economically backward area. In addition, such units were given certain concessions such as tax benefits and electricity at a lower tariff. The purpose was for the regional equality, to promote regional equality. Even an existing industry had to obtain a license for expanding output and for diversifying production. Okay, thus this meant that to ensure that the quality of goods produced was not more than the economy required, license to expand production was given only if the government was convinced with the economy required large quantity. The quantity of goods were in demand rather than the quality. Okay, small scale industry. In 1955, the Village and Small Scale Industries Committee, called the CREV Committee, noted the possibility of using small scale industries. Actually, Gandhiji's vision was also creating small scale communities based on village, which will be creating self-reliance. Okay, so we are looking at small scale industry now. A small scale industry is defined with reference to the maximum investment allowed in the assets of a unit. Okay, this limit has changed over a period of time. In 1950, a small scale industrial unit was one in which invested a maximum rupees of 5 lakh. At present, maximum investment is allowed is rupees 1 crore. It is believed that the small scale industries is more labor intensive. They provide more labor, okay, more employment. But these industries cannot compete with the big industrial firms. It is obvious that the development of small scale industry requires them to be shielded from the large firms. For this purpose, the protection of number of products was reserved for the small scale industry. Criterion, so the criterion and of reservation being the ability of these units to manufacture goods. The government made sure that the products of the small scale industries were sold. Okay, they were also given concessions such as low excise duty and bank loans to lower interest rates at lower interest rate. Okay, now we are looking at the trade policy and the import substitution. The industrial policy that India adopted was closely related to the trade policy. In the first 7 plans, trade was characterized by what is commonly called an inward-looking strategy. Okay, import substitution. The primary aim was like we needed to be self-reliant. The basic necessity or basically essential goods needed to be produced in our country rather than depending on other nations. Okay, that was the primary aim. Okay, for example, instead of importing vehicles made in foreign country, industries would be encouraged to produce them in India itself. In this policy, the government protected the domestic industries from foreign competition. Protection from imports took two forms: tariffs and quotas. Tariffs are a tax on imported goods. Okay, if a say if some product is bought into the country, tariffs were imposed. Okay, so this discouraged for the products entering the market, and these products would be uh, because there was demand in the country, this will be produced within the country. Okay, they make imported goods more expensive and discourage their use. Quotas specify the quantity of goods which should be imported. The effect of tariffs and quotas is that they restrict imports and therefore protect domestic firms from foreign competition. The policy of protection was based on the notion that the industries of developing countries were not in position to compete against the goods produced by the developed economies. Okay, our planners also feared that the possibility of foreign exchange being spent on import. See, whenever we wanted to buy something from outside, from the world, we need to spend foreign currency or dollars. So, as a country, foreign exchange, forex reserve is an important aspect. So, whenever we are hugely dependent on imports, we are spending our foreign currencies. It will affect our economy. Effective policies on industrial development. The achievement of India's industrial sector during the first 7 years were impressive indeed. So, the proportion of GDP contributed by the industrial sector increased in the period from 13% to 24% by 1990 to 1991. So, what does this show? It shows an important indicator in the development. 6% annual growth rate of the industrial sector during that period is commendable. No longer was Indian industry restricted largely to cotton textiles and jute. In fact, the industrial sector became well diversified by 1990. Largely due to what? The public sector. The promotion of small scale industries gave opportunities to those people who did not have the capital to start the large firms to get into business. Okay, protection from foreign competition enabled the development of indigenous industries in the areas of electronics, automobiles, which otherwise could not have developed. Okay, in spite of the contributions made by the public sector to the growth of the Indian economy, some economists are critical of the performance of many public sector enterprises. Okay, because we can say most of them are loss making. They were actually created for the social aspect or welfare of the people, not for profit. Okay, and uh, and going around, we will see over here many public sector firms incurred huge losses but continued to function because it is not difficult to close a government undertaking, even if it is a drain in the nation's limited resources. This does not mean that the private firms are always profitable. Okay, and we even nationalize some of the private sector firms in order to protect the jobs of the workers. However, a loss-making private firm will not waste resources by being kept running despite losses. Okay, it will eventually stop. But in the case of public sector, it's not like that. Okay, now we are looking at the license Raj. The need to obtain a license to start an industry was misused by the industrial houses. A big industrialist would get a license not for starting a new firm, but to prevent competitors from starting new firms. The excessive regulations of what came to be called the permit license Raj prevented certain firms from becoming more efficient. Okay, more time was spent by the industrialists in trying to obtain a license or lobby with the concerned ministers rather than on thinking about how to improve their products. They wanted to cut the competition rather than developing their products. Okay, the protection from the foreign competition was also being criticized on the ground that it continued even after it proved to do more harm than good. Due to the restrictions on imports, the Indian consumers had to purchase whatever the Indian producers produced. The producers were aware that they had a captive market, so they had no incentive to improve the quality of their goods. Because we can see during those time we don't have any BMW or Benz. So at that time we had mainly Maruti. Maruti was there, Maruti 800. Then we have Tata coming up. All these were in the automobile sector. These were the main vehicles. A few economists also point out that the public sector is not meant for earning profits. I have told you earlier, earning profit, but to promote the welfare of the nation. The public sector firms, in the view, should be evaluated on the basis of the extent to which they contribute to the welfare of the people, not on the profits they earn. Okay, that is to be noted. And the conclusion, we will say the progress of the Indian economy during the first 7 plans was impressive indeed. Our industries became far more diversified compared to the situation at independence. India became self-sufficient in food production thanks to the Green Revolution. Okay, and land reforms resulted in the abolition of the much hated zamindari system. In industrial sector, many economists became dissatisfied with performance of many public sector or PSUs. Excessive government regulation prevented the growth of entrepreneurship. In the name of self-reliance, Indian producers were protected against foreign competition, and this did not give them the incentive to improve the quality of goods they produced. Okay, this kind of things happened, but mainly see only if we have proper industry. What if the market was open and foreign companies initially came to the country? Our domestic market won't survive. So initially some restrictions were necessary for the development of our domestic market. Okay, the need for the reform of economic policy was widely felt. Now we are coming for the what privatization, liberalization uh, scheme. Okay, LPG measures. Okay, felt in the context of changing global economic scenario, and the new economic policy was initiated in 1991 to make Indian economy more efficient. That is the subject of next chapter. We will see it. Okay, so with this I'll conclude today's video. I hope the lecture was productive for you guys. So we will see you in the next session. Until then, goodbye. God bless you all. Jai Hind.